You're most welcome to our lesson for today, which is lesson number 25 on our studies of the books of Daniel and Revelation. We are looking at Daniel chapter 11 from verse 14. It reads, "And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall." Question: in those times, what are they referring to? Beginning with this verse, interpretations of the remainder of the chapter of 11, they differ widely, the interpretations. One group of commentators considers that verses 14 to 45 continue to narrate the subsequent history of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kings. Others hold the view that with verse 14, the next great world empire, Rome, enters the scene, and that verses 14 to 35 sketch the course of that empire and the Christian church. I take the second view, which says Rome enters the scene. When another commentary I like on this verse is the phrase, "the robbers of thy people," literally the sons of the breakers of thy people. This expression may be understood subjectively. Thus, the children of the violent among the people. Thus understood, it probably applies to those among the Jews who saw in the international strife of their times an opportunity to further their own national interests and were willing to go beyond the bounds of the law to accomplish them. On the other hand, if understood objectively, this passage would mean those who act violently against thy people. In this sense, it has been taken as referring to the Romans who eventually in 63 BC robbed the Jews of their independence and later in AD 70 and 135 destroyed the temple and the city of Jerusalem. It was in fact during the reign of Antiochus III. You can read that verses 10 to 13, that the Romans, interfering to protect the interests of their allies, Pergamum, Rhodes, Athens, and Egypt, first made themselves felt in the affairs of Syria and Egypt. Let's have a look quickly on verse 15. "So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand." That's verse 15, the king of the north. We come back across this word again. Following the parenthetical remarks of verse 14, this verse continues to the narrative began in verse 13 concerning Antiochus' second campaign in Palestine. It talks of Mount, that is the siege works, then the most fenced cities. This means a city of fortifications. And then there's also a reference to arms, which is a symbol of strength. Arms is a symbol of strength. Verse 16, "But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed." The glorious land, that is Palestine. You can check in chapter 8 verse 9, according to the view that the Romans are introduced in verse 14. The conquest of Palestine here described is believed to be that of Pompey, who in 63 BC intervened in a dispute between the two brothers, that is Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, rivals to the throne of Judea. The defenders shut themselves behind the temple defenses and for 3 months held out against the Romans. It was on this occasion that, according to Josephus, the writer, historian, Pompey lifted the veil and gazed upon the Holy of Holies, now empty of course, for the ark had been hidden since the exile. You can see Jeremiah 37 verse 10. Verse 17 and 18. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. Verse 18. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince of his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease without his own reproach. He shall cause it to turn upon him. The isles, I'm just interested in that part, and the prince and without, those phrases. The isles, it means sea lands or sea coasts. War in other parts of the empire drew Julius Caesar from Egypt. The party of Pompey was soon defeated on the coastlands of Africa. In Syria and Asia Minor, Caesar was successful against Pharnaces and king of the Cimmerian Bosporus. And then they talk of a prince, a man in authority generally, Isaiah 1 verse 10, or more specifically a military commander, as in Joshua 10 verse 24. There was a reference of without. The Hebrew of the last sentence of this verse is obscure. The following translation properly reflects the sense of this passage. That is, indeed he shall turn his insolence back upon himself, or upon him, according to the RSV. Verse 19. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Stumble and fall, what are they talking about? In 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome. Thus, stumble and fall. Verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger. That's verse 20. Neither in anger, that is verse 20. A raiser of taxes. This gives some reference to something we are familiar with from the New Testament, in that Jesus was here on earth during the Roman Empire when there was a raiser of taxes. It means one who causes an oppressor to pass through. The participle noges from the verb nagas, to oppress, to exact, is used of Israeli taskmasters in Egypt, as if you look at Exodus 3 verse 7, and of foreign oppressors, Isaiah 9 verse 4. The passage thus refers to a king who would send oppressors or exactors throughout his realm. Most commentators have understood the reference here to be a tax gatherer, who to the average man in ancient times was the very embodiment of royal oppression. Luke 2 verse 1 records that it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed, literally enrolled or registered. See Luke 2 verse 1. Augustus, who succeeded Julius Caesar, is regarded as having established the Roman Empire, and after a reign of more than 40 years died. That is Augustus. I want us to also quickly have a look at this beautiful comment. At the time of the birth of Christ, the nation was chafing under the rule of her foreign masters and racked with eternal strife. The Jews had been permitted to maintain the form of a separate government, but nothing could disguise the fact that they were under Roman yoke or reconcile them to the restriction of their power. The Romans claimed the right of appointing and removing the high priest. Look at that. They had that right. And the office was often secured. How? By fraud, by bribery, and even murder. Thus the priesthood became more and more corrupt. Yet the priests still possessed great power, and they employed it for selfish and mercenary ends. The people were subjected to their merciless demands and were also heavily taxed by Romans. This state of affairs caused widespread discontent. Popular outbreaks were frequent. greed and violence, distrust and spiritual apathy were eating out the very heart of the nation. As in old time, Cyrus was called to the throne of the world's empire that he might set free the captives of the Lord. So Caesar Augustus is made the agent for the fulfillment of God's purpose in bringing the mother of Jesus to Bethlehem. She is the lineage of David, and the son of David must be born in David's city. Out of Bethlehem, said the prophet, shall he come forth, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from the days of eternity. That's Micah 5 verse 2. Let's quickly look at verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Who is this vile person? Or what is this vile person who shall not give the honor of the kingdom? A vile person. That is one lightly esteemed or despised. Augustus was succeeded by Tiberius AD 14 to AD 37. Certain historians maintain that there was deliberate attempt by Suetonius, Seneca, and Tacitus to blacken the character of Tiberius. Doubtless the picture was overdrawn. Nevertheless, sufficient factual evidence remains to show that Tiberius was an eccentric, misunderstood, and unloved person. We are told they shall not give. Literally, they did not give. The Hebrew is better translated in the past tense. The reference is probably to the fact that Tiberius was not originally in line for succession to the throne, but became the son of Augustus. How? By adoption, and was appointed heir to the empire only when he had reached middle life. Peaceably, when Augustus died, Tiberius ascended the throne peacefully. He was the only stepson of his predecessor, and his ascension to the imperial dignity was to a considerable extent due to the maneuverings of his mother Livia. That's verse 21. Verse 22. And while the arms of flood, I'm interested in that phrase, arms of flood, shall they be overthrown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. I'm following on the arms of the flood and prince of the covenant. Arms of flood. Arms denote power, and here particularly military power. You can see verses 6 and 15. The picture is evidently that of flood-like armies of soldiers. Chapter 9 verse 26. Tiberius was eminently successful in leading several military campaigns both in Germany and in the east on the frontiers of Armenia and Parthia. Then Prince of the Covenant, identical with the prince who confirms the covenant of chapters 9. We are looking at all the references I'm making are for Daniel. Chapter 9 verse 25 to 27. That this order, this was the Messiah, Jesus Christ, is clear from the prophecy of chapter 9. It was when Tiberius reigned between AD 14 to AD 37. And upon the order of his procurator of Judea, Pontius Pilate, that Jesus was crucified in the year AD 31. Verse 23. But before I get there, there's this comment I want to read. When Christ spoke the words, "It is finished," he addressed his Father. Christ was not alone in making this great sacrifice. It was the fulfillment of the covenant made between the Father and the Son before the foundation of the earth was laid. With clasped hands, they entered into solemn pledge that Christ would become the substitute surety of the human race if they were overcome by Satan's sophistry. The compact was now being fully consummated. The climax was reached. Christ had consciousness that he had fulfilled to the letter the pledge he had made. In death he was more than a conqueror. The redemption price had been paid. His right hand and his glorious holy arm have gotten home the victory. Christ was without sin, else his life in human flesh and his death on the cross would have been of no value in procuring grace for the sinner than the death of any other man. While he took upon him humanity, it was a life taken into union with the deity. He could lay down his life as a priest and also as a victim. He possessed in himself power to lay it down and to take it up again. He offered himself without spot to God. The atonement of Christ sealed forever the everlasting covenant of grace. It was the fulfilling of every condition upon which God suspended the free communication of grace to the human family. Every barrier was then broken down, which intercepted the freest exercise of grace, mercy, peace, and love to the most guilty of Adam's race. While God's word speaks of the humanity of Christ when upon this earth, it also speaks decidedly regarding his pre-existence. The Word existed as a divine being, even as the eternal Son of God, in union and oneness with his Father. From everlasting, he was the mediator of the covenant, the one in whom all nations of the earth, both Jews and Gentiles, if they accepted him, were to be blessed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Before men or angels were created, the Word was with God and was God. Verse 23. And after the league made with him, he shall deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Comment. After the league, some commentators have suggested here that Daniel goes back in point of time to the league of assistance of friendship arranged between Jews and Romans in 161 BC. This view assumes that the Hebrew expression translated time, verse 24, designates prophetic time. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. Yea, and he shall focus his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. What meaneth these things? For a time. Until a time, this expression points to a point in time when the devices of the power here set forth were brought to an end. When we look at verse 25, and he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty arm, but he shall not stand, for they shall focus devices against him. Stir up his power. I'm interested in that. According to one exposition referred to previously, this verse refers to the struggle between Augustus and Antony, which culminated in the Battle of Actium and the defeat of Antony. Verse 26, yea, they that feed of the portion of the smith shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. They that feed. Some see reference in this phrase to royal favorites. From the days of the early Caesar's palace, intrigue marks the rise and fall of emperors of Rome. In later years, particularly when one army officer after another succeeded to the throne of the Caesars, often each at the price of the head of his predecessor, and the prediction that royal favorites would rise and destroy those who had befriended them, and that many would fall down slain as a result, met a singularly apt fulfillment. In ancient Orient, those who ate food provided by another person were expected to remain loyal to him. Verse 27, and both the king's hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. What is this time appointed and this mischief? To do mischief. Some see this praise to reference to the intrigues of Octavian, later Augustus, and Antony, both of them aspirants to universal control. Others see a reference to the struggle of power during the closing years of the reign of Diocletian, 284 to 305, and during the years between the death of Diocletian and the time that Constantine the Great, 306 to 337, succeeded in reuniting the empire between 323 to 324. The time appointed. Evil men and their machinations can last only as long as God suffers them to continue. Period. Verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. Comment. Then shall he return. Some expositors see in this prediction a reference to the siege and destruction of Jerusalem by Titus in AD 70. Others who hold to the chronological continuity of the prophetic narrative, verse 23, see a further description of the work of Constantine the Great against the Holy Covenant. Christ spoken of a prince of the covenant. As prince of the covenant, it is he who to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. You remember chapter 9, verse 20. This covenant is the plan of salvation laid in eternity and confirmed by the historic act of Christ's death. It seems reasonable then to understand the power here referred to as one which at heart would be in opposition to that plan and to its outworking in the souls and the lives of men. This is what we believe. Others suggest otherwise. Constantine is the subject of prediction, but I do not look at it that way because of the evidence that is overwhelming that points to what I've just shared. So I would like to end it here and take the next step in the next lesson that we are going to have. Friends, we are getting to the height of the lessons or the conclusions of the lessons of the book of Daniel. It is getting more tougher and more difficult, but we are concluding. We are left with one more chapter. May God bless you as you contemplate on this history and prophecy at the same time. My prayer for you in Jesus' name.